by a little while? We don't understand what he's saying. 19. Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this, so he said to them, are you asking one another what I meant when I said, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me? Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. In that day, you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly, I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. Some version says your joy will be full. Now, there's something that we see here that in this passage as I was reading is that when God silence feel confusing, when God's silence feel confusing, because one of the hardest experience in the Christian life is waiting in confusion. You are waiting, and as you're waiting, you are also confused. You pray, but heaven seems to be very quiet, and you believe, yet circumstances move from bad to worse. Words don't make sense, and therefore you find yourself in confusion. And that's exactly where the disciples in this story are right now. That's where they are. Jesus is hours away, just hours away from the cross. The disciples, they sense a loss, but they don't understand it fully. They hear Jesus giving promises, but they can't interpret them well. And in verse 16 to 24, it is going to teach us the gospel truth that God often works joy through sorrow, clarity through confusion, excuse me, and fullness through prayer. We're going to see those three areas. But the most important thing we start with, first of all, is this word, a little while. A little while. Very interesting in verse 16. Jesus went on to say, in a little while, you will see me no more. And then in a little while, you will see me. And we can see here, I will say that a little while is a phrase that is intentionally, deliberately ambiguous. It's very ambiguous for them. And you can see that Jesus is pointing, because we now understand with foreknowledge, Jesus is pointing to two things when he's speaking about a little while. Number one, he's talking about his death. So he says, a little while, you will not see me. He's dead. And then he says, a little while, you will see me. Resurrection. That's the second thing he's talking about. They will see him again. So they will not see him, and then they will see him again. So he's going to die, and then he's going to resurrect. And the disciples, they don't understand this. So they whisper among themselves. We do not know what he's talking about. In verse 17, at this some of his disciples said to one another, what does he mean by saying, a little while you see me no more, and then a little while you will see me? Because I'm going to the Father. They kept asking, what does he mean? Verse 18, by a little while we don't understand what he's saying. And this is actually a very much good example of honest confusion. They're not rebelling, they're just confused. The disciples hear Jesus' words, but they cannot yet interpret God's language or even timing. What does he mean by, he doesn't say, I'm going to die, I'm going to resurrect. He's using the word a little while. And the church, sometimes this happens to us when we read about God's promises of healing. He's going to heal, he's going to restore, he's going to provide, he's providing, he's going to direct. And between the promises and the fulfillment, there is confusion. Between the sickness and healing, between the failure and the restoration, between the lack and the provision, the darkness and the direction, there is confusion. And yet Jesus does something very pastoral here. We read in verse 19 that he knows what they want to ask, and he addressing it. Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this. So he said to them, "Are you asking one another what I mean when I said, in a little while you'll see me no more, and then a little while you will see me?" He does not shame their confusion. He brings their confusion into the open because he wants to address it. Now, confusion does not mean unbelief. And questions does not disqualify faith. It doesn't, when you're asking God a question, it doesn't mean that you lack faith. Or when you're confused about something that God said, it does not necessarily mean that you have unbelief. And Jesus sees the questions that we have not even asked. He knows them. And when God says a little while, it may feel long to us between the promise and the fulfillment, but it is never meaningless. That season, that a little while, it is never meaningless. So we see that. Another thing that we see is in verse 20. Sorrow is very real, but it is not the final thing. In verse 20, we read, "Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. You will weep and mourn while the world is rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy." And we can see the disciples' sorrow is telling them in verse 20 will be very real. It's not an imaginary thing. You will weep. The world's joy. You see, as the disciples are weeping, the world is celebrating. We have killed him. But their joy will be temporary. We see that because the disciples' joy will be transformed into their pain, their weeping will be transformed into joy, and it will be permanent. But you see, the world, we read here in verse 20, verse 19, this is verse 19. So he said, "Are you asking one another what I meant when I said, in a little while? After a little while you'll see me." Then verse 20, "Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices." So while you see that progression, and then there'll be a reversal. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. And this is going to happen. All this is going to be brought about by the cross. The world will think at the cross that they have won, so they will be celebrating. While the disciples think they have lost at the cross, so they will be weeping. But Jesus is promising a reversal. Very crucial gospel pattern even today. Christian joy is not the absence of sorrow. We know that. And Christian joy is sorrow transformed by resurrection. When Jesus was on the cross, that resurrection brought joy. The sorrow that you might be going through, when you look at the cross, you will know that your sorrow eventually works out into joy, reversal. That's what the point is even today. And as believers, as the world is celebrating temporal victories, I don't know today what the world around you is celebrating. Maybe sometimes life is hard, you're jobless, family is not working out, and all these things, and you're trusting God for his hand to come in. And maybe all seems like you're weeping and you've lost everything. But if you are a true believer and you remain faithful to Jesus, as you endure all this hardship that sometimes life throw at you, you endure this temporal pain, there will be a reversal for eternal joy. That's what Jesus is teaching. Do not measure God's faithfulness by today's emotion. Don't. We can see all this is happening on a Friday, the pain. Come on Sunday, we have Resurrection Sunday. The darkest Friday that you're going through in your life may be preparing you for a Sunday, a Resurrection Sunday. And basically, grief does not cancel God's promise. It doesn't. It prepares it. The grief you're going through, the pain you're going through, your sorrow is not the end of the story. Your sorrow is the steps that God is going to work out something for permanent joy. That is the story. And so your sorrow is not the end of your story. And that's why I said in this lesson, sorrow is real, but it is not final. Number 3, pain that produces life. And we can see this in verse 21 and 22. Jesus gives one of the most powerful metaphors in the Bible. He says, a woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. Verse 22, so with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. So he's beginning by a woman giving birth has pain, but when the baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy. And here, Jesus is not minimizing the pain. He is showing the purpose in pain. Pain is not wasted. It produces life. Pain produces life. There's a book I read by Dr. Paul Brand. One of the best books I've ever read. I think Paul Brand and Tim Keller. Pain, the gift nobody wants. You go look out for that book. Go read it. I don't know if I have a PDF. I might even post it in this group. The gift, pain, the gift nobody wants. Yes. So birth pain is intense, but it produces, but it's productive pain. It is intense, but it's productive pain, not destructive pain. Likewise, the cross looks like defeat, but it produces resurrection of life. Then Jesus goes ahead and reassures them, I will see you again, he says, and no one will take your joy from you. So that's the truth. The resurrection joy is untouchable joy. You can't touch it. It is not based on material things. Circumstances didn't give it. People cannot steal it, and time cannot erode it. So Jesus says, no one will take your joy from you because it is untouchable joy. Nothing can take away your joy from you. Circumstances cannot. People can steal it, and time cannot, because maybe you say it's delayed, it can't. And sometimes pain you are walking through is birthing something God has promised. Birthing something God has promised. Not all pain means punishment. Some pain means new life is coming. Something new is in the pipeline. Trust God in the labor pains. Fellowship, I will urge you today to trust God in the labor pains that you are having. And Jesus is encouraging them as well as encouraging us today. And so he comes to verse 24 and is moving from confusion to confidence in prayer. You know, they're confused in all these things Jesus is talking about, but now we're moving from confusion to confidence in prayer. We see in verse 24, until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask. First of all, verse 23. Yeah, let me pick it 23. In that day, you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly, I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. So Jesus is shifting to prayer. In that day, you will no longer ask me anything. My Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. And this passage explains that day. What that day, in that day. The day in that day refers to life after resurrection and life in the spirit. Because in that day, here Jesus is already resurrected and he has sent the helper. So it is life after resurrection and the spirit. Now, prayer will now be directed to the Father in Jesus' name. The prayers, I wonder how they used to pray in the Old Testament, directly to the Father. Through who? Through who? Maybe through the covenant, I don't know. But here you see, prayers will now be directed to the Father in Jesus' name. And this reflects new covenant access. New covenant access, a better covenant. And this is revolutionary to us today. This is revolutionary to us today because they no longer need to cling to Jesus physically. They need not to cling to Jesus like Mary physically on the resurrection Sunday, the way she was trying to do. They will relate to the Father direct through Jesus Christ. It's funny today, some pastors still wants to be the go-between. They have not allowed the people to go direct to the Father. They, as pastors and leaders in churches, we need to teach our members to have direct access, fellowship with God direct through Jesus Christ. And that is a healthy church. So Jesus says, ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. Ask and you'll receive. So prayer is not just about receiving answers. Prayer is about completing the joy that has already started. We say a prayerless Christian is a joy fellowship with God without having communion, talking time. Because you are talking. Prayer is you talking, and you are talking back and forth with God. You are sitting, having this fellowship, having this conversation. You bringing your heart, he brings his heart, and in that environment, you get your answers, you get your questions, you get clarity, the confusion is gone, and the disciples will enjoy that. And I wonder why sometimes we don't experience this, because we see very clearly here prayer with confidence, not with fear. In Christ Jesus is what we have. And pray in this sense is a prayer that is aligned with Jesus' character. You know, what this I know you've heard a lot about blank check. Whatever you ask in my name, ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. No, you pray expecting joy, not just outcomes, not just you getting this, but the joy that accompanies an answered prayer. That is very profound. You know, in fact, when you pray, and sometimes even the thing has not been fulfilled. I don't know if you've ever experienced kind of, I call it the Abraham's laughter. When Abraham was talking to God and they told him, you're going to have a son, and he laughed, you know. And the Bible does not say that he did not disbelieve. The joy is like, man, I can't wait to see this. You know, this is going to be like a movie. And he just laughed. He laughed. He was still childless, but you can see the guy. He knows, but now it's even making him funny. To him, it's funny how God is going to work this out. And he can't wait to see it. And sometimes this needs to be our portion too. Jesus ties prayer and joy together. As I conclude, Living between a little while and full joy is very important, because that's why we started and we're finishing with joy. My fellow brethren, in this passage, we see how to live faithfully when God's words are not yet clear. When they're not yet clear, like in the disciples, or pain has not yet been lifted and joy is still very far. Jesus is promising here that your confusion will be temporary. Don't worry. He will clarify everything. Number two, your sorrow will turn to joy. Your sorrow will turn to joy. And prayer will open access to the Father. Your prayer will open access to the Father. Resurrection joy will not be stolen. The joy that will come afterwards will be permanent. And I remember the Nigerian song that I used to love. One of the things I love about the Nigerians is their music. They used to sing this: it shall be permanent, it shall be permanent. What the Lord has done for me, by faith it shall be permanent, permanent. It shall be permanent, permanent. It shall be permanent. What the Lord has done for me, by faith it shall be permanent. Your children permanent. Yeah, they're mentioning these things. Of course, some of them they were mentioning funny stuff, but for me, it's like your peace will be permanent. The fruits of the spirit. That's how I see it. But I love the melody and the song and the point they're driving at. It shall be permanent. If you are in a little while season, hold on, ask God, trust deeply, because Christ's resurrection guarantees your sorrow will not have the final word. May God bless you, and thank you so much. Karibuni sana.